Deep blue states are now paying the price, literally, for handing out free stuff to undocumented migrants. States like California, Illinois, Minnesota, led by the champions of liberal politics who talk some of the biggest game out there, they're now being forced to scale back healthcare programs for the undocumented. They're facing the harsh reality of budget deficits, soaring program costs, and higher than expected enrollments after years of mismanagement and irresponsible spending. And Chris, I'll get your take on this because we've all weighed in on this topic certainly before. But right here in New York City, I remember during the pandemic riding past a bus and it said, if you're undocumented, we're going to give you healthcare benefits. And they were advertising where to go and who to call. And I thought to myself, this city is so cash strapped and taxpayers are leaving. We cannot afford this, yet somehow we're doing it. It seems like some of the cities, not necessarily here, but they're starting to understand that it's not manageable.
And that seems like a common sense response, right? And I think compassion, it sometimes does not need to take in common sense, and that's okay. But when you are responsible for the tax dollars and where those tax dollars go, compassion must be in balance with common sense. You cannot spend your way to compassion when the check bounces. And this is a primary case study for why border security is so important. Because, before you can create real opportunities and reform inside the lifeboat of the United States, you first have to stop the leaks. And I think the administration has done a fantastic job here by evidence of some of the numbers we're seeing coming out of the border. But, these states are feeling the pain of not keeping compassion in balance with common sense. And we're seeing it firsthand, and everybody's watching.
California, Governor Newsom, Medi-Cal is $6.2 billion over budget. They wanted to give every undocumented migrant health care. Deegan.
First state in the nation that opened its state Medicaid program to illegal aliens. And it only started the beginning of last year. And within 1 year, they had completely blown out the budget on it. And it's circular. It's not just trying to deport people who came in illegally. When you have a program like that, we would never be able to build a wall tall enough to keep out the illegal migrants trying to get into the U.S., knowing that you can get on Medicaid in a state like California. It was an incentive for people to cross into the United States or cross into California. Well, and what the Senate even went further in trying to do is crack down on the money laundering scheme that the states use for like the $9 for one or $1, but it's they also for Medicaid, because what the California and certainly New York do is if you tax a medical provider and then you take that money and you spend it on and to get a match on, you spend it on Medicaid and then you get the federal government's match. But they use that federal government money, our money, to then cover the illegal aliens on these programs.
Tim Walz saw what Gavin Newsom was doing in California with Medi-Cal, and he said, "Hold my beer," because this is crazy. This is my home state. This is nuts. In 2023, Minnesota had a budget surplus of $18 billion.
Until
and they said we're going to offer this health care to legal migrants, and they said about 7,700 will sign up. So get to fast forward to 2025. Actually, 20,000 people signed up, and the state now has a long-term $6 billion deficit.
Yep.
Okay, so you're talking about $24 billion swing, and I love what you said, Chris, about if you try to write checks for compassion won't work when they bounce. Yeah. But the only thing I would say is I don't know if these guys are compassionate. To me, there's such a power play wrapped up in all this. Like, is the state government doing this for these migrants because they love them, because they're compassionate, or is there something a little? And I'm not a sinister guy or like a cynical guy, but I do think it's more than compassion here because these programs don't. it's not compassionate to put people in a position who, one, shouldn't be here, and two, are completely dependent on the government.
No,
that is not conducive to human pride.
They're trying to draw them here because it furthers their agenda. They believe if these migrants stay here and eventually have an opportunity to vote, they're trying to really change the laws so that undocumented people can vote. If they don't, if they have children and you go by birthright citizenship, then they'll be able to vote. And they're trying to change the demographics of the country, and they're using our taxpayer dollars to incentivize them to come and do it. And that's why they didn't want President Trump in office, because he told you he was going to shut down the border, and he did. Final thoughts, Tim?
Yeah, 2 quick points. One, states can't print money like the federal government. So it's easy for the federal government to spend, and we'll print our way out of this mess, right? States do not have the ability to do that. Most state constitutions require that states balance a budget, and that's where all of these conversations come in. My other point, we've talked a little bit about the mayoral race here in New York City. To me, this also comes down to financial literacy, because the more that you keep taxing people to pay for people who aren't paying taxes, the more those people will leave. We heard Andrew Cuomo come back to the socialist mayoral candidate who said, we're just going to tax the rich. What they don't understand, the rich are paying 80% of the income taxes. And when the rich leave, there is no one left to pay for all of these programs. But I have a lot of friends on the left who say, oh, boo-hoo, the rich don't pay anyways. Who cares if they leave? So there's a financial literacy problem with people on the left who don't understand that the wealthy are paying the taxes to support programs like these. And when you drive them away, there is no one else to fund the Ponzi scheme.
Well, that's partly why they do these really complex hidden provider taxes like Dagan was talking about. That's a way to get around taxing the wealthy directly, and nobody even knows that it's going on. And in the meantime, all it is a scheme to get the federal government, who can print money, to throw more in. So that's how they get around that issue.
So the provider tax that, again, used in this money laundering scheme was capped at 6% in the House bill, and the Senate cut it to 3.5%.
Yeah.
And Josh Hawley's losing his mind, and the only people who are going to get hurt, rural hospitals, not going to get hurt, but wealthy healthcare executives will. Remember that.
Coming up, the fleeting reality of living under one paycheck, why Americans under 40 are turning to side hustles to make more money. That's next.